From saving their fish from Europeans to becoming some of the most dangerous pirates in the Indian Ocean, the story of Somali piracy is not what most people think. A lot of people do not realize that European actions in Somali waters played a major role in pushing local fishermen down this path. What began as an attempt to protect fishing grounds slowly turned into something far darker. Piracy off the coast of Somalia mainly takes place in areas like the Gulf of Aden, the Guardafui Channel, and wide stretches of the Indian Ocean. It happens both inside Somali territorial waters and in nearby international waters, and it has a long and complicated history that people see very differently depending on where they stand. For some, it began as an act of survival, while for others, it quickly turned into organized crime that threatened global trade. In the early 2000s, piracy was mostly aimed at international fishing vessels, because local fishermen felt pushed out of their own waters. But over time, especially during the war in Somalia between 2006 and 2009, it escalated rapidly and spread to major international shipping routes. This shift did not happen overnight, even though it may look sudden from the outside. The conflict between Somali fishing communities and foreign vessels grew in a situation where Somalia had already been losing huge amounts of money every year. Since 1991, the country is estimated to have lost around $300 million annually due to illegal fishing by foreign fleets. These vessels often use destructive practices like dynamite fishing, which is banned in many parts of the world because it destroys marine ecosystems. Because Somalia lacked strong governance after the collapse of the central government, there was little ability to stop this exploitation. So even though the ocean held enormous potential for local livelihoods, it was being drained by outsiders. Coastal Somali communities often explain the origins of piracy as a form of self-defense. According to them, foreign trawlers were stealing fish, damaging reefs, and blocking access to traditional fishing grounds that families had relied on for generations. It wasn't just about lost income, but also about dignity and survival. On top of that, these communities claimed that toxic and even nuclear waste was dumped into Somali waters by European companies, causing serious environmental damage. Some reports from the coast describe children becoming sick or dying, which only fueled anger and mistrust. Because of all this, many of these groups started calling themselves the People's Coast Guard, a name that stuck and became widely recognized. Somali waters are actually rich in fish and other marine resources, but the sustainability of these fisheries has been badly undermined. The domestic fishing industry in Somalia has always been small and poorly equipped, especially when compared to massive foreign fleets that had been operating in the region for decades. Foreign fishing vessels had access to better technology, bigger nets, and more powerful ships, which meant they could harvest fish at a scale local fishermen simply couldn't match. This direct competition reduced fish populations and damaged marine habitats, particularly through bottom trawling, which scrapes the seafloor and destroys ecosystems. Foreign fishing activity increased dramatically after 1981, but the biggest jump happened in the 1990s, right after the collapse of the Somali government under Siad Barre and the outbreak of civil war. By 1992, Somalia was widely labeled a failed state because there was no effective central authority and internal conflict was widespread. Although a federal government was established in 1994 with international support, it struggled to assert control over the country. Threats from armed groups like Al-Shabaab made the situation even worse, so Somalia remained fragile and unstable. Because of this chaos, the Somali Navy could no longer patrol or protect national waters. Foreign fishing vessels took advantage of this vacuum, entering Somali waters freely and without fear of consequences. For coastal communities, this felt like an invasion that no one was stopping. In response, local fishermen began organizing themselves into armed groups. They used small boats, skiffs, and simple weapons to confront foreign vessels. At first, their goal was mainly to scare trawlers away or demand compensation, but over time, these encounters became more aggressive. Some groups started detaining ships and crew members, demanding ransoms in exchange for their release. Interestingly, several pirates later said they would stop if Somalia had a proper national coast guard capable of protecting its waters. But since that never fully materialized, piracy slowly turned into a profitable business, with ransom payments growing larger and more frequent. Once these groups started hijacking commercial cargo ships instead of just fishing vessels, they were widely labeled as pirates. Poverty, corruption, and the lack of stable institutions meant there was little local incentive to stop them. Many unemployed young men saw piracy as one of the few ways to earn money, especially because successful hijackings could bring in life-changing sums. International organizations began raising alarms because piracy increased shipping costs, disrupted global trade, and encouraged profiteering by insurers and security firms. Some observers even believe that political figures inside Somalia cooperated with pirate groups to gain money and influence. After major terrorist attacks like the 1998 U.S. Embassy bombings, the USS Cole attack in 2000, and the September 11th attacks in 2001, the United States decided to increase its naval presence around the Horn of Africa. This led to the creation of Combined Task Force 150, a multinational anti-piracy coalition. Its area of responsibility covered over 2 million square miles, including some of the world's busiest shipping lanes. These waters are vital for global trade because millions of barrels of oil and thousands of cargo ships pass through them every year. Countries like the US, UK, France, Germany, India's partners, and many others took part, rotating command every few months. By around 2010, these naval patrols had significantly reduced piracy incidents. Warships escorted vessels, responded quickly to distress calls, and disrupted pirate operations before they could succeed. Although piracy never fully disappeared, attacks dropped sharply. In early 2017, a few incidents resurfaced, but navies from Europe and Asia acted quickly, rescuing hijacked ships like the OS-35. This showed that international cooperation was still effective, even though the underlying issues on land remained unresolved. In January 2023, the International Maritime Bureau officially lifted the Indian Ocean high-risk area designation. This decision came after several years with no major Somali pirate attacks. However, experts warned that pirates still had the skills, weapons, and networks needed to resume operations if conditions allowed. And that warning proved accurate, because toward the end of 2023, piracy activity began to rise again. As the war in Gaza escalated late in 2023, instability spread across the wider region. This created opportunities for criminal groups, including pirates, to re-emerge. According to the IMB, December 2023 saw the first successful hijacking in the area in 6 years. In March 2024, Indian naval commandos carried out a dramatic rescue operation around 500 kilometers off the Somali coast. They freed the ship and took 35 Somali pirates into custody, later prosecuting them in Mumbai. This resurgence of piracy was closely tied to unresolved root causes like poverty, weak governance, and regional instability. Looking back further, Somalia had once tried to develop its fishing industry in a more organized way. In the early 1980s, before the Civil War, the Ministry of Fisheries launched programs to support artisanal fishermen. These efforts included cooperatives, infrastructure projects, and foreign investment. At the time, Somalia's waters were seen as largely untapped and full of promise. The government even allowed foreign fishing through licenses and joint ventures, such as partnerships with Iraqi and Italian companies. All of that collapsed when the central government fell apart in the early 1990s. The Somali Navy disbanded, and territorial waters were left completely unguarded. Foreign trawlers rushed in, fishing illegally and dumping waste offshore. Fish stocks declined rapidly, and fishermen felt abandoned. Small groups began to arm themselves, and confrontations escalated from protests to hostage-taking. By around 2000, piracy had clearly taken root, and during the war years from 2006 to 2009, it exploded. Interestingly, during the brief rule of the Islamic Courts Union, piracy almost completely stopped. The courts enforced strict security and carried out aggressive anti-piracy actions. But after the group collapsed in 2007, piracy surged again. Some officials within the transitional federal government were accused of being involved because ransom payments were simply too tempting to ignore. Financiers, former fighters, and clan networks all played roles, sharing profits from hijackings. Despite the violence involved, pirates generally avoided harming hostages because keeping them alive increased the chance of getting paid. International naval forces eventually expanded their role, setting up designated patrol areas in the Gulf of Aden. But pirates often escape by retreating into Somali territorial waters, where foreign navies initially lacked legal authority. This led to a UN Security Council resolution in 2008, allowing foreign forces, with Somali consent, to pursue pirates inside Somali waters. Even then, legal complications meant that many captured suspects were released because they had not been caught in the act. By the end of 2011, piracy at sea had declined sharply. Only a handful of ships were hijacked compared to previous years. Pirates shifted tactics, focusing more on land-based hostage-taking. Regional governments like Puntland also stepped up, creating maritime police forces that targeted pirate bases. International conferences, such as the London Somalia Conference in 2012, aimed to coordinate long-term solutions. By late 2012, piracy in the Indian Ocean had dropped to its lowest level in 6 years. Attempted hijackings fell dramatically, and successful attacks became rare. For several years, Somali piracy seemed almost finished. But although the attacks stopped, the conditions that caused them never fully disappeared. By the early 2020s, piracy began creeping back. In November 2023, the USS Mason helped stop an attack on a tanker linked to an Israeli-owned company. In early 2024, ships like the MV Abdullah were hijacked and crews were taken hostage. Analysts noted that pirates were shifting focus from the Gulf of Aden toward the Red Sea, adapting to changing security patterns. The Indian Navy became a major force in counter-piracy operations, conducting long-range missions and rescuing hijacked vessels. In one case, 35 pirates captured during a rescue operation were sent to India for trial. European forces under Operation Atalanta also continued patrolling, detaining suspects, and protecting shipping lanes. Most Somali pirates are young men, often from conflict-ridden southern regions. Studies showed that many came from areas with little economic opportunity, while fewer originated from more stable northern regions. Over time, pirate bases shifted locations, especially after Puntland cracked down on operations. Pirate groups usually include a mix of people: experienced fishermen who understand the sea, former militiamen who provide muscle, and technical experts who handle navigation and communication equipment. Although outsiders call them pirates, many prefer Somali terms that frame their actions as protection of the sea. Weapons are mostly sourced from Yemen or Mogadishu and include assault rifles, machine guns, rocket launchers, and grenades. Piracy financing operates like an informal stock market, where investors buy shares in planned attacks. Ransoms are paid in cash, often dropped from helicopters or delivered by small boats. Hostages may wait months before being released. There have also been allegations that members of the Somali diaspora helped fund pirate operations. Additionally, some reports suggest limited cooperation between pirates and Al-Shabaab, mainly involving extortion and shared access to territory. While definitive proof of direct operational ties is limited, there is little doubt that piracy and militant activity have sometimes overlapped in Somalia's complex conflict environment. Once piracy spread beyond coastal fishing disputes and turned into a ransom-driven industry, the damage it caused started reaching far beyond Somalia's shoreline. The most obvious impact was financial, because hijackings quickly became extremely expensive for ship owners in global trade. Early on, ransoms were relatively small. In 2005, for example, the gas tanker MS Feisty Gas was held for about 2 weeks before being released for roughly $315,000. But as pirates realized how much money was at stake, demands exploded. By 2010, ransom payments had jumped into the millions, with the average payout rising from around $150,000 to more than $5 million. Pirate income followed the same path, climbing from tens of millions to well over $200 million at its peak, even though it later dropped as naval patrols intensified. But the real cost of piracy was not limited to ransom payments alone. A bunch of indirect expenses piled up as well, including higher insurance premiums, naval deployments, legal proceedings, longer shipping routes, and private security measures. These added billions of dollars to global shipping costs, even though critics later argued that some estimates exaggerated the damage and mixed piracy losses with insurance profits. Still, the fear created by piracy reshaped how ships moved through the region, because companies preferred slower, safer routes over faster, but riskier ones. Closer to home, piracy also disrupted everyday life in Somali coastal towns. During its peak, residents complained that heavily armed men made communities feel unsafe, while sudden cash inflows distorted local prices and fueled drug and alcohol abuse. Regionally, countries like Egypt lost revenue as fewer ships passed through the Suez Canal, and tourism and fishing suffered in places like the Seychelles. Even though piracy briefly created local economic booms, the human cost was severe. Hostages were abused, traumatized, and sometimes killed, while rising tensions at sea increased violent encounters involving armed guards, pirates, and even innocent fishermen. What began as resistance to exploitation ultimately spiraled into a crisis that reshaped global trade and local lives alike. In the end, I think that Somali piracy is not just a story of crime at sea. It is tied deeply to state collapse, environmental exploitation, poverty, and unresolved political instability. Even though international patrols can suppress attacks, piracy tends to resurface whenever attention fades and underlying problems remain unsolved. And that's that for today's video. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next one.